Brandon Mitchell, a 32-year-old accountant at Reynolds Financial Services in Austin, Texas, had spent 18 months planning what he believed would be the perfect wedding to his fiancée, Ashley Parker. The ceremony took place on June 8, 2024, at a lakeside venue in the Texas Hill Country, attended by 120 guests including family members, college friends, and professional colleagues who had watched their relationship develop over the previous 3 years. Ashley, 28 years old, worked as a marketing coordinator for a technology startup in downtown Austin, earning approximately $52,000 annually in a position that allowed her creativity and social skills to flourish. She had met Brandon at a mutual friend's barbecue in 2021, and their relationship had progressed steadily through shared interests in hiking, live music, and exploring Austin's restaurant scene. The couple purchased a 3-bedroom house in the Cedar Park suburb in April 2024, using their combined savings for a down payment while planning to start a family within the next 2 years. Their new home was located in a quiet residential neighborhood with mature oak trees and friendly neighbors who welcomed them enthusiastically. The wedding had been elegant but understated, reflecting Ashley's preference for intimate gatherings rather than elaborate productions. Brandon's parents had contributed significantly to the costs, viewing the marriage as an ideal match between their responsible son and Ashley's energetic personality that complemented his more reserved nature. The honeymoon was planned as a week-long trip to Cancun, scheduled to begin 2 weeks after the wedding, to accommodate work obligations at both of their employers. However, the intervening period would allow them to settle into their new home together and adjust to married life before their vacation. Their first week as a married couple proceeded normally, with both returning to work while coordinating household responsibilities and discussing furniture arrangements for their new residence. Friends and family members who visited during this period described them as happy and affectionate, displaying the typical behavior of newlyweds excited about their future together. However, according to evidence that emerged during subsequent investigation, Ashley had been concealing a brief romantic involvement that had occurred during the month immediately preceding her wedding. The relationship involved Tyler Harrison, a 23-year-old graduate student who lived 3 houses down from the Mitchells' new residence. Tyler had moved into his rented house in March 2024 while completing his master's degree in architecture at the University of Texas. He was friendly and outgoing, often seen running in the neighborhood or working on design projects on his front porch during pleasant weather. Ashley had met Tyler during one of her visits to the house while she and Brandon were preparing it for move-in before their wedding. Their initial conversation had been casual and neighborly, focusing on the area's amenities and Tyler's academic work in sustainable building design. However, the interaction between Ashley and Tyler had evolved beyond friendly neighbor conversations during late April and early May 2024, when Brandon was traveling frequently for work to complete tax season obligations that kept him at the office until late evening, or required overnight trips to client locations. According to digital evidence later recovered by investigators, Ashley and Tyler began exchanging text messages that progressed from discussing neighborhood topics to more personal conversations about their lives, relationships, and feelings. Ashley had confided in Tyler about her pre-wedding anxiety and her concerns about whether she was ready for the permanent commitment that marriage represented. Tyler, recently out of a long-term relationship himself, provided emotional support that Ashley found comforting during a stressful period when Brandon's work obligations meant he was less available for the wedding planning decisions and emotional reassurance she needed. The relationship had crossed into physical intimacy on 2 occasions in May 2024, according to Tyler's later testimony to investigators. The encounters occurred at Tyler's residence when Brandon was traveling for work, and both times involved Ashley expressing doubt about her upcoming marriage while seeking validation and attention that she felt was lacking from Brandon. However, Ashley had decided to end her involvement with Tyler after their second encounter, recognizing that continuing the relationship would jeopardize her marriage before it even began. She had told Tyler that she loved Brandon and wanted to commit fully to her marriage, asking him to keep their brief involvement confidential. Tyler had agreed to Ashley's request and had maintained appropriate distance from the Mitchells after their wedding, though he remained friendly during occasional neighborhood encounters. His perspective was that their involvement had been a brief mistake during a stressful period, rather than a meaningful relationship worth pursuing. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The secret that Ashley and Tyler had agreed to keep concealed became exposed through an unexpected circumstance on June 22nd, 2024, just 2 weeks after the wedding. Brandon had arrived home early from work due to completing his projects ahead of schedule and decided to surprise Ashley with dinner preparations. While looking for his phone charger in Ashley's home office, Brandon discovered her laptop open to a messaging application that displayed portions of her conversation history with Tyler. The visible messages included references to their May encounters and Ashley's expressions of guilt about the situation. Brandon's discovery was accidental but devastating, as the messages clearly indicated that Ashley had been intimate with their neighbor during the weeks immediately before their wedding. The revelation contradicted everything Brandon believed about their relationship and Ashley's commitment to their marriage. Brandon's initial response was to read through the entire message history between Ashley and Tyler, finding additional evidence of their emotional connection and physical encounters. The messages revealed that Ashley had been conflicted about the wedding while simultaneously planning it, creating a narrative that contradicted the excited bride persona she had displayed publicly. When Ashley arrived home from work that evening, she found Brandon sitting at their dining table with her laptop open to the messaging application. His expression was described in later testimony as cold and emotionless, a stark contrast to his usual warm greeting when she returned from work. The confrontation that followed was initially verbal, with Brandon demanding explanations about the messages and Ashley's relationship with Tyler. Ashley's response was to admit to the brief involvement, while emphasizing that it had been a mistake that ended before the wedding and that she was committed to their marriage. However, Brandon's reaction to Ashley's confession indicated that her explanations were insufficient to address the depth of his feelings of betrayal. According to evidence presented at trial, Brandon viewed Ashley's pre-wedding infidelity as invalidating their entire relationship and marriage, suggesting that she had married him under false pretenses while knowing she had been unfaithful. The argument escalated throughout the evening as Brandon pressed Ashley for increasingly detailed accounts of her encounters with Tyler and her motivations for the relationship. Ashley's attempts to apologize and reassure Brandon of her love for him were met with accusations that her affection was false and that their marriage was built on deception. By late evening, neighbors reported hearing shouting from the Mitchell residence. Though the specific content of the arguments was not clearly audible, several residents considered calling police due to the intensity of the voices, but ultimately decided against intervention in what appeared to be a domestic dispute. The fatal assault occurred during the early morning hours of June 23, 2024, when Brandon's anger over Ashley's infidelity reached a breaking point. According to evidence presented at trial, Brandon attacked Ashley with his fists in their bedroom, inflicting massive trauma to her head and face that caused fatal injuries. The medical examiner later determined that Ashley sustained multiple skull fractures, severe brain hemorrhaging, and facial bone damage consistent with repeated blows delivered with significant force. The extent of her injuries indicated that the assault had continued well after she was no longer capable of defending herself or escaping. Ashley's attempts to protect herself were evident from defensive wounds on her forearms and hands, suggesting that she had been conscious during the initial portion of the attack and had tried to block Brandon's strikes. However, the severity and number of injuries indicated that Brandon had not stopped the assault, despite clear signs that Ashley was severely injured. Following Ashley's death, Brandon called 911 at 3:47 a.m., reporting that he and his wife had been arguing and that she was now unresponsive. His tone during the emergency call was described by the dispatcher as eerily calm, lacking the panic typically associated with discovering a spouse's critical condition. Cedar Park Police Department officers arrived at the Mitchell residence at 3:54 a.m. and found Ashley's body in the master bedroom. Emergency medical technicians pronounced her dead at the scene, after determining that her injuries were incompatible with life and that she had been deceased for some time before the emergency call was placed. Brandon was found sitting in the living room with blood on his hands and clothing. He immediately admitted to officers that he had struck Ashley during their argument about her infidelity, but claimed that he had not intended to kill her and had lost control due to overwhelming anger about her betrayal. The crime scene investigation revealed blood spatter patterns throughout the bedroom that indicated a prolonged and violent assault rather than a single strike or brief altercation. The positioning of Ashley's body and the distribution of injuries suggested that Brandon had continued attacking her even after she had fallen to the floor and was no longer resisting. Detective James Rodriguez of the Cedar Park Police Department noted that the severity of Ashley's injuries was inconsistent with Brandon's claims about loss of control, as the number and force of blows indicated sustained violence over several minutes rather than a momentary emotional reaction. Brandon Mitchell was arrested and charged with first-degree murder based on the evidence of prolonged assault and the obvious intent to cause serious bodily harm. He was transported to the Williamson County Jail, where he was held without bail pending trial, due to the severity of the charges and the risk of flight. The investigation expanded to include interviews with Tyler Harrison, who confirmed his brief relationship with Ashley and provided additional context about her emotional state during the weeks before her wedding. Tyler expressed shock and guilt about Ashley's death, acknowledging that his involvement with her had contributed to the circumstances that led to Brandon's violent reaction. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Let us know in the comments what you think about how infidelity cases should be handled when they result in deadly violence. Tyler was not charged with any crimes related to Ashley's death, as his consensual adult relationship with her, while ethically questionable given the timing, did not constitute criminal behavior or direct participation in the events leading to her murder. The case attracted significant attention in the Austin area due to the recent marriage between Brandon and Ashley and the brief period between their wedding and her death. Media coverage focused on the tragedy of a newlywed couple whose marriage ended in murder just 2 weeks after their ceremony. Ashley's family members expressed devastation about her death and outrage that Brandon had responded to infidelity with lethal violence rather than pursuing divorce or separation as appropriate solutions to marital problems. Her parents described Ashley as imperfect, but not deserving of death for her mistakes. Brandon's family initially attempted to defend his actions by emphasizing the emotional trauma of discovering infidelity so soon after marriage, but eventually acknowledged that his violent response was inexcusable regardless of the circumstances that provoked his anger. The preliminary court proceedings revealed additional evidence about Brandon's state of mind during and after the assault, including his methodical cleanup attempts before calling 911 and his lack of remorse during initial police interviews. These factors suggested premeditation rather than temporary loss of control. Brandon's defense strategy focused on arguing for reduced charges based on provocation and extreme emotional disturbance caused by discovering Ashley's infidelity. Defense attorneys claimed that Brandon's actions were the result of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder, emphasizing that he had no history of violence prior to this incident. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Brandon's prolonged assault and his delay in seeking medical assistance for Ashley contradicted claims about momentary loss of control. Expert witnesses testified that domestic violence often escalates from emotional abuse to physical violence when abusers feel their authority or trust has been challenged. The prosecution presented evidence that Brandon's reaction reflected a sense of ownership over Ashley and a belief that her infidelity justified violent punishment rather than appropriate legal responses such as annulment or divorce. They argued that his actions demonstrated the deadly consequences of viewing intimate partners as property rather than autonomous individuals. Mental health experts testified about the psychology of domestic violence and the patterns of behavior that lead to intimate partner homicide. They emphasized that while discovering infidelity is emotionally painful, it does not justify or excuse violent responses, and that Brandon's choice to kill Ashley rather than end their marriage peacefully demonstrated criminal intent. The trial revealed additional details about Brandon and Ashley's relationship, including previous arguments about trust and control that friends had observed during their engagement. Several witnesses testified that Brandon had displayed possessive behavior and had questioned Ashley about her interactions with male colleagues and friends. These observations suggested that Brandon's violent reaction to Ashley's infidelity was consistent with a pattern of controlling behavior, rather than an isolated incident triggered solely by discovering her relationship with Tyler. The prosecution used this evidence to argue against claims of temporary emotional disturbance. The jury deliberated for 16 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of second-degree murder. The verdict reflected the jury's conclusion that while Brandon's actions were triggered by discovering Ashley's infidelity, his prolonged assault and failure to seek help demonstrated conscious decision-making rather than complete loss of control. Brandon Mitchell was sentenced to 40 years to life in state prison, with possibility of parole after serving 30 years. The judge emphasized during sentencing that domestic violence could never be justified by a partner's infidelity, and that Brandon's actions had destroyed multiple families while ending Ashley's life. Ashley Parker Mitchell was buried following a memorial service attended by hundreds of friends, family members, and colleagues who remembered her as vibrant and ambitious despite the mistakes she had made in the final weeks of her life. Her family established a domestic violence prevention fund in her memory. The house where Ashley was murdered was sold by the estate, with proceeds distributed to Ashley's family to cover funeral expenses and memorial contributions. The property sold at a significant loss due to its association with the crime and required extensive cleaning before it could be listed. Brandon's wedding ring and other personal effects from the marriage were destroyed at his family's request, as they represented memories too painful to preserve given the circumstances of Ashley's death. His parents have maintained minimal contact with him during his incarceration. Tyler Harrison completed his graduate degree and relocated to another state to escape the media attention and community knowledge of his involvement in the events leading to Ashley's death. He has declined all media interviews and has requested privacy while processing his guilt about the situation. The case prompted discussions about the importance of addressing relationship problems through communication and professional counseling rather than violence, regardless of the severity of betrayal or emotional pain experienced by partners who discover infidelity. Domestic violence prevention organizations used Ashley's case to emphasize that no circumstance justifies intimate partner violence, and that individuals who feel overwhelmed by relationship problems should seek help from mental health professionals or support services before situations escalate to violence. Brandon Mitchell is currently serving his sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Huntsville unit. He has participated in anger management and domestic violence prevention programs, but continues to express that discovering Ashley's infidelity created emotional trauma that impaired his judgment. The case remains a tragic example of how relationship betrayal can trigger deadly violence when individuals lack emotional regulation skills and view their partner's actions as justification for violent responses rather than reasons to pursue legal separation.